Hello, people. Welcome to the community of the Growth Mindset podcast. Guys, if you are a first time listener, don't forget to subscribe on whichever platform you're listening from so that you don't miss on more interesting episodes coming up in following weeks. And for our daily listeners, here we are again with a new episode where we will interview another interesting personality from a unique industry and understand how they were able to accomplish this great level of success. Remember, this is a podcast where we learn easy, practical methods and tips that we can implement in our daily lives from the very best and the most successful people known today. Because as we all know, success leaves clues. And we, the people having the growth mindset, will use these clues to create a better, more fulfilling, and a successful life. So, let the growth begin. First thing first, Jordan, thank you so much for taking your time out and joining us on the Growth Mindset podcast. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Awesome. Jordan, for people in India, since podcasting is a fairly new space, it's not something that has boomed currently. Would you like to tell people, for people who might not have heard about you, a little background about you and your podcast?
Yeah, sure. Growth Mindset University is my podcast, and it's all about learning the lessons that we should have learned in school but did not. And it features lessons from people that we should have been learning from as well, not just people who are spewing regurgitated theory from a textbook produced by McGraw-Hill Education or Cengage, or pick your poison, really. I don't know if I wonder if they're in India. I wonder if it's just an American company or
Not a lot.
not a lot. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. But but bottom line, yes, we're learning from the people we should be learning from. People like Ryan Serhant of $1 Million Listing New York. How to sell yourself. It makes sense to learn from somebody like that who sells billions of dollars of real estate every year on a TV show, on the biggest real estate TV show. Human Nature from Robert Greene of 48 Laws of Power, The Laws of Human Nature.
Perfect. And when did you start your podcasting journey? What got you into this mindset of, I should start a podcast maybe?
Yeah, I started in April of 2018. I think my first episodes came out on April 17th of 2018, and I posted about it everywhere, and nobody batted an eye. I announced it everywhere, no one cared.
True.
Rightfully so. Like I even when we launch a client's new podcast sometimes, and they don't have like this gigantic built-in audience, they'll announce it, and honestly, people don't care in the beginning. Like it's hard to get people to care, especially with me. And I didn't have nothing in my track record, my body of work previously indicated that, this might be good. There really wasn't anything good prior to that. So in a way, I don't know. It wasn't big for a really long time. And, depending on what podcast you compare it to, it might still not be big. It's big compared to most podcasts, but when you compare it to the Lewis Houses of the world, it's really not big. So I don't know what got me into the mindset of starting it, but I just did.
Interesting. And a lot of people actually in India are starting a podcast, are getting into this podcast space. Now, for people that I personally work with, that I train, and this is one very important question that I've been asked over and over again as to how to find leaders like, let's say, Neil Patel, or let's say Robert Greene, or I normally recommend people is, basically, sending them an email or reaching out to them on LinkedIn, trying to engage with their post. This is one way of doing it. Do you have any better ways, as to how people can approach these leaders so that they have better shot at getting these guests on the podcast?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I am only hosting people on the podcast who I am already naturally curious about, people whose books I have consumed, people whose products and services I use. I have successful people who make a lot of money pitching me all the time. And somebody last, and I don't even respond. I just delete the messages. Like I'm just like the messages, the emails. And I think I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it'd be a good podcast. I'm sure you're very successful, but like, I honestly, like, I don't know who you are. And I have a limited number of spots. I have 52 spots a year, one a week. And I have my own agenda. I have my list of people that I want to get to. And I don't want to have to feign curiosity. I don't want to have to pretend to be curious, that is. But how am I reaching out to these people that I really, really want to interview? Well, I'm using email. I use a tool called hunter.io to find their emails. I also use a tool called rocketreach.co, and I send them an email. That's how I do it.
Interesting. And what kind of email should it be good when you're drafting an email? Like, how should they approach it?
Yeah, you have to show them that you care. You have to prove to them that you've consumed their work beyond just reading their profile or something that anyone can find. You can't just say, love your work. Anyone can say that.
Yeah.
Really, what do you love about it?
Yeah. True. That's the tough question, right? If somebody
I'm tempted to, I'm tempted to say that sometimes when I get like, maybe I'll get any sort of pitch and they're like, oh, saw your profile and really loved it. I just want to say like, yeah, man, what do you love about it? What's it? What do you like? You wouldn't have no idea. So you got to go a little bit deeper than that. And this is why, like, I don't have to try because I'm reaching out to people whose work I've already consumed, who I already know about. I don't have to do a bunch of homework. Yeah. And so I will in the subject line put something specific, maybe a line from their book, maybe something they said in a tweet or a LinkedIn post or like that. And then the whole first paragraph, which is about 1 to 3 sentences, nothing more, is commenting on something that they wrote or did and its relation to me and how it impacted me. There's just a lot of things in there that prove that I care and that I've consumed their work.
Interesting. That's a very good insight because at times even when I send them emails, I'm not very specific about the work. I think this is something very important that, all of the podcasters who are trying to reach out to other guests should keep in mind. Take a couple of days if required, but at least craft, show them that you really care. And
yes, it's the most important part. And I will emphasize that I already said this, but I will emphasize that the subject line is yet another opportunity to prove that you care and that you've consumed their work. Don't miss out on that opportunity. Really, the subject line and the first paragraph are great places to implant that. And I mean, the rest is just very briefly, explaining your show and maybe a one line and your social proof, who your past guests were, and then asking them, going for the ask.
Yeah, true. And what are some things that you've noticed, Jordan, when it comes to a podcast, or some mistakes that you are looking at they making, which could actually which is kind of hampering their success or hampering the growth? Any things that you are noticing today?
Yeah, a lot of people just having guests because other people have guests on their podcast and they think they should. They just have guests for the sake of having guests. Just because they think that some void has to be filled. Some guest slot inherently must be filled. And that's not the case. We launch podcasts plenty that are solo. That you don't have to have guests. So it's funny, so many people assume that a podcast has to have guests, or at least a lot of people in our space. And it's funny, we launched a podcast last week and I was reading the comments on this person's post when he announced it. And so many people, like countless people, like 200 people were like, yo, we got to record. And I'm just sitting there laughing, being the mastermind behind it, like managing this podcast. And I'm like laughing, like, you assume that this podcast has guests. This is not an interview show. This is a solo show. and the host and I were having a laugh about it. So yes, having guests for the sake of having guests and faking curiosity, pretending to be curious about this person that filled their imaginary void of a guest slot. It sounds weird, and people just don't listen to those podcasts, and unfortunately it is in our space, the majority of them. And the best podcasts, you can hear the curiosity. Think like James Altucher and Joe Rogan. Like, think about the tones that they use. Think about, they really, really, really want to talk to these people. Like, don't have a guest on your show unless you really, 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 really want to talk to them. That's what I'm trying to say here.
And how should people prepare? I mean, let's say if you are really going to go ahead and interview somebody that you really love, you adore his work.
Well, yeah, you don't even have to prepare that much. It's funny because I wrote a little bit about preparing in my book, The Podcast Playbook. And that was before I really shifted into exclusively interviewing people whose work I consumed previously. And so now I really don't have to do much preparation because I've done the preparation over the past few years. I'm already very, very familiar with them. And all it takes is just very briefly putting some bullet points onto the notes on my phone and then just having that up right here on the desk while I'm, so that's what helps me. I like to have that safety net. I like to have some bullet points. If it's an in-person interview, I'll actually print out a piece of paper. I'll print my notes out. Just again, bullet points that honestly, some people look at it and they're like, what is this, Jordan? Like, you wouldn't even like, only I know what the bullet points, like they're just like almost in a way heuristics, like shortcuts for my mind, like just to fall back on, like this word will trigger something, in my brain. This will tell, I'll be like, oh yeah, I got to go down this path. I got to ask this question. So that's really all it is for me at this point.
Interesting. And what about, let's say, people who want to grow their podcast, find more listener base? This is a challenge that a lot of people face. What, according to you, are some practical tips that people can do which can help them grow their podcast, reach out to more audience? Yeah.
So there are you can only do so much organically, but of course you should definitely maximize that. If you're not on LinkedIn, I really don't know what you're doing. And, it's just not happening on Instagram. It's just not. So LinkedIn's great. LinkedIn is the way. Video is the way. I love, the audiogram videos from each episode. I love quote cards from each episode. I love, like, it's great to be able to put out, like, what did I post one 2 days ago? The quote card for this week, a quote image of Jim McKelvey, co-founder of Square. And it was, the first time something is done, it's always done by someone who's unqualified. And, it's good to just be able to, put that out and for me, get, 10,500 views on it. And that's great. I do really rely on LinkedIn. And when I don't promote an episode on LinkedIn, which I do experiment with every now and then, I have fewer listeners. I just do. Fewer people will listen to that episode when it doesn't get promoted on LinkedIn. So, that's one. But yeah, paid promotion is really great. And I'm not talking Facebook ads per se, but the podcast apps, a lot of them you can, they have partner programs where you can reach out and do some paid placement, maybe show up on the homepage. And look, some of them range, some of these platforms cost like $8 or $14 per subscriber, which is absolutely terrible. And some of them are 50 cents per subscriber. And so there's some really great opportunities out there. You just got to go through all the podcast apps and email them about their partner program and find out information. And, the only difference between a lot of people and the Jordan Harbingers of the world is paid placement.
Interesting. I didn't know this because this is the first time I've heard this where somebody said, you could actually go ahead and promote your podcast on, different podcasting platforms or applications. This is interesting. This is a new place for us to explore as podcasters, and especially in India, where this is not something which has grown to a great extent. Obviously, that insight would help a lot of podcasters. And
yeah, and it's really great, because sometimes they'll target it to like, when I run a promo, it's like, obviously targeted to English speaking languages, but they have these apps have listeners from everywhere around the world. Like you could target just India, if you could make your podcast show up on the homepage of the app in India. It's a really great opportunity. Obviously involves good investment of capital. But for
it's
me,
worth it.
Worth it.
Yeah. Perfect. And in your experience, right, like coming out a little from the podcasting space in your own personal life, Jordan, what did you learn? Let's say top two lessons from Robert Greene when you interviewed him.
Oh, I was hoping you'd ask about him. That's great.
He's an amazing guy. Yeah.
Yes. So one of the things that I reference all the time in my podcast and in real life is you can uncover somebody's shadow sides. You can uncover somebody's dark side, their dark traits, by noticing what are their overly emphatic traits. Because generally under the emphatic trait lies the opposite. So under that extreme show of aggression usually lies a lot of insecurity. For example, somebody who's like, oh, I'll beat the crap out of you, who just goes to that line whenever they feel threatened, which I know somebody like that in real life. Well, we all know that person is extremely insecure.
Yeah.
Extremely, like shockingly insecure. And so let's think about it in terms, and this is the example that Robert Greene used with social justice warriors. Think about these are you familiar with the term social justice?
No, I'm not.
So these virtue signalers.
Okay.
People who are all about, think about what's going on in America right now. Usually, there's Antifa, the anti-fascists. Well, the anti-fascists, if you haven't figured it out by now, are the fascists. the anti-racists are the racists. These virtue signalers. Oh, and another example. The male feminists are usually the abusers. Right. The people that are the loudest usually have the most to hide. You see people like Bill Clinton and the Clintons with all these charities and the Clinton Foundation and the guy's like a serial rapist. He's got so much to hide, So I think that those examples are kind of funny. But you think about it in terms of virtue signalers, these social justice warrior types who are always on the right side of things, making this show of love and peace. And usually what lies under their love and always on the right side of things, always so morally superior, usually under that lies a lot of hatred and pent up aggression.
Interesting. Okay.
Yes. And that is ever present in America right now. There's so many points of evidence with that. It's really quite sad, quite funny for me, but also very sad. But yeah, that is the chief lesson that I take from Robert. And that's obviously, it's covered in The Laws of Human Nature.
Yeah. Okay. If I had to ask you, let's say 2 books that, again, this is a vague question but I want to understand which are top 2 or 3 books that you love so far, which is very close to your heart.
Yeah, The Laws of Human Nature. Kind of in order back here.
Okay.
The Laws of Human Nature is on top because it doesn't fit on the shelf. But yeah, that and Way of the Peaceful Warrior and The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And those are my 3 favorites, and I've interviewed all of them.
Yes, amazing. I've seen you've got some really interesting people, and kudos to you. That's really nice. Jordan, for people, let's say, who want to become successful in any field, it could be podcasting, it could be becoming a content creator, any specific field that they'd like to become. what are some top 3 traits that you think people should develop in them?
Well, I'll throw a caveat in here. Usually when people are giving advice, it kind of sounds like, these are the lottery numbers I played. They worked for me.
Yeah.
So they'll work for you too. So that's my caveat.
Okay.
That this, all the unique circumstances and right time, right place, and there are too many variables to even count. Point being, what's happened to me over the past really 2 years, I guess, is when things really started going. It's not entirely replicable. But what I'd say is, dig the well before you're thirsty, and that build rapport with people before, if ever, you need to go in for an ask. And that's just being a power connector, reaching out to a lot of people. Whenever you hear somebody on a podcast, where any podcast you hear, you should be reaching out to both the host and the guest afterwards. It's just common sense for me that after I hear a podcast, I reach out to, at the very least, the guest that was on that show, and maybe I form a relationship with them, or I'm connected with them, and maybe, they start seeing my posts. I don't know. And I'm constantly reaching out to weak and dormant tides in my network, and re-engaging with them. Not for any specific reason, but, relationships, as Jordan Harbinger would say, are the best insurance policy. You need to, when shit hits the fan, you got to be able to really want to be able to have a lot of people who are ready and willing to come to your aid and lend you a helping hand and help you get back up. What are you going to do if you lose everything tomorrow? Yeah. So that's something to think about. Treat everyone like they can get you a cover story on Forbes magazine.
Yes, I read your post. That was nice. Yeah.
Yeah. You never know what someone can do for you 3 days from now, 3 weeks, 3 years, 30 years from now. You never know. And that's not to say that, the cover story is the goal. It's not. That's just a good way to treat people.
Okay. Now, let's say before you started a podcast, right? 2 years ago, you started that in 2018, right? April 17th? Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, on that specific day, if you could go back and, give your younger self, you're 22 years old now, if I'm not wrong?
I turned 23 a couple of days ago, so.
Yeah. So let's say if you could go 4 years back in time and then give whatever you've learned in these 4 years, if you could give your younger self any advice in terms of starting the podcast, doing something, correcting some mistake that you've done, what would those be?
Oh, I'd say start it at, if I started it 4 years ago, that'd be cool. If I had, that's a lot of time, man. That's the earlier, the better. Yeah. That would be huge. I'd have a lot more listeners. I can only imagine where I'm going to be in a year and a half. And if I had started it in 2016, Jesus Christ, man.
Yeah.
Whew. That was the best time to start. 2016, 2018. I mean, really, like I said, the earlier the better. 2015 was better than that. It really should have started in 2006, to be honest.
This is something that even I had, because I started my podcast a year ago in 2019. Mm-hmm. Right. And I was thinking about this from 2016, that I should start a podcast.
Oh, wow.
If I would have started back then, instead of being one of the top 5, I would at least be.
Why didn't you start in 2016?
I was just waiting, that I'll get better equipment. I'll build a website.
Man.
I mean, there were so many things. And then.
So yeah, and obviously this now, but you don't even need a microphone, but you get a microphone, you spend $50, $60, $120 on a microphone. One time I spent $120 on this microphone 2.5 years ago, and that's it. I don't need to spend, I haven't needed to spend any money on microphones. Like, it doesn't, you don't need all that stuff. You don't need a website. Just don't. Again, that now. But the thing that I would say is I wasted 65 episodes, and it could sound harsh, but I say this to everyone, regardless of whether they use this tool or not, but I would say don't use Zoom. I did 65 episodes with Zoom. It's a great meeting software. I use it almost every day for all sorts of meetings, but it's not a tool that's built for podcasters. The sound quality isn't great. It's just, and it's honestly just not, the quality is just not very good. Use something like Squadcast or try.cast, weirdest domain I've ever heard in my life. Try.cast.
Yes. Okay.
Or yes, but Squadcast or riverside.fm, squadcast.fm. Using a piece of software that's going to record the audio locally, so it could sound like we're in the same room. Especially if you and I are both using some pretty good mics right now. If we were on one of those platforms, we'd sound primo. Instead of being recorded over the internet like Zoom,
interesting.
It's just way better. It's far superior. You're going to see a paywall. You're going to see Squadcast $20 a month. You're going to see Riverside. Riverside's audio and video, so I think it's $40 a month. You see Cast is probably like $10 a month. But you get what you pay for.
True. End of the day, podcast is all about the audio quality, right? The better audio quality, the better experience the listeners.
Yeah, and I really do believe that audio quality is one of the most important things in terms of listener retention.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. Now, this is one question, Jordan, that I asked almost every guest on my podcast. Okay, this is one last question, and I want to ask you as well. Again, this is an advice. So I know you don't like giving advice, but 2 practical tips to everybody out there. You understand the importance of the growth mindset, right? The Growth University. You have a similar podcast. I have a growth mindset. Now, what can people do to develop this growth mindset? The idea of, learning and growing every day. Do you have any ritual or practices that you do that is helping you?
I just know that I can solve most problems through learning. I very, very often learn my way out of pain. Whenever I'm faced with some sort of challenge, there's always a book on it, man. When it came to communication and my inability to talk to people, I very much solved that problem with a number of books on the subject. When I did not know I didn't know persuasion, I did not know sales, I couldn't sell crap. I very much solved that problem. And so much so to the point where since April, I feel like I'm coming into almost reaching that level of mastery in selling. Like I really have I just got it, man. And before April, I was horrible. I didn't know prospecting. I didn't know how to prospect. You might think prospecting and sales are the same thing. They're not. They're 2 very different things. I'd say sales is, being in the conversation, in the meeting. And I would say and prospecting is reaching out to people, reaching out to prospects. And that's where do I even start? Who do I reach out to?
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't figure, I would read all these books on sales and I got it. And then the few chances that I got from inbound leads, I was like, I would crush it. I was like 100%. Like I would close every deal with inbound leads.
Nice.
Inbound leads are obviously much easier to close.
True.
And I had the knowledge of sales, but then I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to prospect. I don't know how to do this. But I know I can. Just got to figure it out. I just got to find the resources on it. And it took a little bit to find took a couple months to find the right resources on it that'll really help me. And, I very much figured that out. So I kind of just go from like one thing to the next. Like, all right, I'm going to focus a few months on solving this problem now. Just kind of identify those pain points and then identify the resources, out there, seek out the resources from people who ought to know, and then go test what you've learned.
Yeah. So it's basically you, even if you don't know something, it's all about learning first and then taking action towards those to make sure that you actually go ahead and, achieve what you want to do. And you can't say or make excuses saying, I wasn't able to do it. That's not the way forward. What are the other platforms people can reach out to you for your courses or just want to talk to you?
I have a entirely free course on podcasting. It's called How to Become a Rockstar Podcaster. It's about an hour of content, very professionally recorded, multiple camera angles. It's all very, very professional. Really good course. Really proud of it. It's been out for well over a year now, and so many people have started podcasts because of this course. I feel like every other podcast I get on, the person on the other side is like, "Oh, you're the only reason I have a podcast," and it's because of that course. And so it's at jordanparis.com/course.
Perfect. Awesome, Jordan. Thank you so much, for being an amazing guest and sharing all the story. I'm sure that this should definitely help a lot of podcasters in India as to some of the issues that they were going through or they are going through, and they could, go ahead and fix those loopholes. So thank you so much for joining us on the Growth Mindset podcast.
Yeah, certainly.
This brings us to the end of this episode, and hope you at least had one takeaway from this interview. If you have any questions or want to talk to me personally, you can find me at www.silawathirshad.com. See you soon.